Hi, here we are back with Evidence Not Seen, the miraculous story of faith in the jungles of World War II, the story of Darlene Deibler Rose. And we started yesterday and are now in chapter 1, partway through chapter 1. Mr. Brill informed me at the evening meal that my language teacher would be arriving at 8:30 the following morning. Soon I would be able to communicate with the native people around me beyond a handshake and a smile. God had called me, and he would equip me for the ministry. Language was a tool I would learn to use, and with his enabling, I would use it well. Promptly on time, the next morning, I was introduced to a middle-aged Indonesian man who nodded, and I nodded back. Then Russell left the room. I spoke not a word of Indonesian. He, not a word of English. Immediately, my tutor rose from his chair and left the room, only to soon reappear. He half bowed and said, "Selamat pagi, Janja. I don't think this is any easier than the Japanese that we were reading before. I stared at this ceremony silently. Yes, sure, I thought to myself, slam it, or whatever that was. No, I can't even read the English now. Yes, sure, I thought to myself, slam it, or whatever that was you said. Because he said Salamat, Paggy. So she said slam it. When I didn't speak, my tutor again walked out of the door and came back in, enunciating every syllable distinctly. Salamat, Paggy, Janja. The wheels of my mind began to turn. This was some kind of greeting. So when he walked out the door the third time, I was prepared. He entered, bowed, and repeated the greeting. I rose from my chair, bowed, and replied, Salamat pagi, Nanjanja. The short, obese man in a starched white cotton suit scowled, his hands waving wildly in the air, his head shaking a definite no. He tapped his chest and expressively emphasized, Tuan, Tuan. Then he pointed to me and explicitly declared, Nanjanja, Nanjanja. I wanted badly to laugh at myself, for I had just replied, Good morning, Mrs., to this intense little man. To assure him that I understood, I bowed and said, Salamat Pangi, Apaji, Tuan, to which he replied with a smile, Bayek, Bayek. Good, good. I didn't know what bike. It sounds like bike. Bike, bike. What a bike had to do with it, but I learned from my first lesson well, and never again called a gentleman Mrs. Every day I studied with my tutor, who proved to be an excellent, if demanding, instructor. When he took his final bow each afternoon, leaving me free time, I gravitated to the servants' quarters. The cook, a young woman, and the laundry boy helped, laughed at, and corrected my Indonesian. If my pronunciation erred, or I asked them to repeat something, they increased the volume with each repetition. It was with glee that I finally learned to tell them that my hearing was fine. It was my Indonesian that I had to work on. Celebes was an island of contrast. I need to look up how to pronounce that word. Celebes. It looks like Celebes. With a spine of high mountains running north and south that towered to 11,000 feet, and mysterious blue lakes that were thousands of feet deep. Wow. Lush tropical vegetation blanketed the mountain terrain. Yet, near the center of the island, the mountains were honeycombed with limestone caves. I loved the island and its people. However, I knew it was but a temporary stopover. Soon I would walk over the horizon of the future into the last unknown, New Guinea, and I was confident that on this island of Celebes was a group of dedicated, like-minded men and women who would walk the trails with us by faith and prayer. One September morning, I was to meet one of those men, Dr. Robert A. Jaffray. "That's Mr. Jaffray, next to Margaret," Russell explained as the ship docked. I knew him at first sight. How could I miss him? He stood head and shoulders above the fellow passengers and removed his white pith helmet to acknowledge our greetings. His short white hair was neatly combed, and he was smooth shaven except for a closely trimmed mustache. I don't know why I pronounced it that way. Mustache. Mustache. He stood with the natural dignity of a man well born. Keep seeing the word mustache. Hands resting on the rail of the ship, one thumb hooked through the handle of a small briefcase. Margaret, or Muggings, or Muggy, as he affectionately called his daughter, helped him ashore, and the many packages she carried as gifts for the missionaries adorned her like ornaments on a well-decorated Christmas tree. Dr. Jaffray approached me and grasped my hand warmly in his. This must be Darlene. I can understand now why Russell needed a longer furlough. His warm smile and twinkling blue eyes belied any sternness I thought might accompany a man so tall and striking in appearance. "I'm afraid we're still occupying your house," I apologized, foregoing a greeting in my nervousness. Margaret hurried to kindly reassure me. "You mustn't think of moving. Mother's visiting friends in Singapore and Java. She'll probably not arrive until after conference." The field conference for the missionaries in the Netherlands East Indies would not convene until November. That left much time to drink deeply from Mr. Jaffray's contagious enthusiasm for New Guinea. He carried a well-worn map of the trail from Oita to the Whistle Lakes with him. As soon as he was settled in, we began to make lists of supplies and cost estimates. The three of us were entirely consumed with the plan of claiming the interior of New Guinea for the Lord. We studied every bit of information available. We learned that on January 1st, 1937, a Dutch pilot named Mr. Whistle and his American co-pilot, Mr. Jack Atkinson, were flying on an aerial survey job for the Babo Oil Company of New Guinea. The new year had dawned. It was a rare day when the clouds had lifted from New Guinea's backbone, exposing the snow-covered Carstens mountain range. The flyers flew along some 30 miles of snow fields, which often rose to rugged snow-clad peaks and glacial lakes. They were awed by viewing nature in its infancy, untouched, unspoiled, undesecrated by the needs of modern people. When they dropped over the northern escarpment of the range, they saw below them what appeared to be 3 circular clouds nestled in the mountains. Descending to a lower altitude, they discovered not cloud formations, but 3 crystal clear lakes, and on the largest of them were men and women rowing canoes in this part of the world said to be uninhabited. As Russell and I researched the resulting aerial surveys, we learned that the Oita River which emptied into the Banda Sea on New Guinea's south coast, had its beginnings in the largest of Whistle Lakes, Lake Paniai. If someone followed the Oita River to its source, surely additional villages of the newly discovered people could be found. The Dutch government, which controlled the East Indies, soon made funds and field police available to make the virgin trip. With the river as their guide, the patrol hacked and tore their way through the dense undergrowth of tropical jungle. They struggled over forest-clad mountains, only to find another range awaiting them, steeper, more rugged than the last. Crude lean-tos were haphazardly built at the end of each exhausting day's trek. Many carriers, mostly natives from the coastal regions, died and were laid in shallow graves along the edge of the night's encampment. All suffered from the scant food supply and the freezing temperatures in the higher altitudes. When, nearly a month after leaving the coast, the survivors crossed the last range and walked down into the Stone Age, a great horde of yodeling, near-naked Aboriginal people followed them to the headwaters of the Oita River, Lake Paniai. Did it say how many people went? I don't think it says how many people went, but it sounds like a lot of people died. A few police, several prisoners, and an assistant patrol officer were left at Anaratali. I hope you don't mind how I learn to pronounce things. Anaratali, to occupy the hastily constructed government shelters on a hillside overlooking the lake. The only link between this primitive post and the outside world was a battery-powered two-way radio. The more we heard, the dearer the map and history of New Guinea became. Claimed by Spain in 1545, New Guinea was so named by the Spaniards because the coastal inhabitants of this second largest island in the world resembled the tribes of Africa's west coast. Dutch traders established the first European outposts on the island early in the 19th century, and the Netherlands annexed the western half of the island in 1828. We came to know every curve of the map of New Guinea. The island resembled a gigantic Paleozoic bird of prey, its primal head thrown up, mouth open, as though to suck in the smaller islands of the Moluccas with the incoming tide. The breast of New Guinea hovered above the topmost tip of Australia, and its tail crested in the Coral Sea. The formidable coastal frontier, the impenetrable mangrove swamps, possessively guarded by crocodiles, venomous snakes, and cannibal tribes, had discouraged even the most courageous seafarers for centuries. That's enough to keep me from going there. On June 21, 1938, an expedition sponsored by the American Museum of Natural History of New York City, led by Richard Archibald, traced the Baliem River through a valley situated 250 miles east of the Whistle Lakes. Their plans were to take samples of the flora and fauna of the foothills of Mount Wilhelmina, one of the highest peaks of New Guinea. Their initial flight into the area revealed a densely inhabited valley of Stone Age cannibals. Rereading the account of the expedition's findings impressed us anew with the magnitude of the task of reaching the countless millions of New Guinea mountain recesses. The field conference convened in November at Bedtime in the mountains some 60 kilometers from Makassar. Bedtime means high fort, and it was indeed a place of refuge from the enervating heat of the coast. Meetings were held in a huge octagonal building with adjoining private accommodations. My first conference was much larger. My first conference was one of much laughter and camaraderie with other missionary families. The conference voted unanimously that Russell and I, along with another couple, Walter and Violet Post, be appointed to the Whistle Lakes. Even before the conference appointment, we all had obtained work permits, but the government refused to allow women to travel over the rugged and grave-lined trail that already testified to the unbelievable expenditure of strength and endurance demanded of those who traveled inland. Until conditions were favorable, Russell and Walter Post would trek to the Whistle Lakes, and Viola and I would remain in Makassar. In early December, Walter Post and Russell left by inter-island steamer for Ambon, the seat of the government controlling the Spice Islands. Here, they purchased additional trail boots from the field police canteen, a minimum of camping equipment, as well as trail food for themselves and their carriers. The governor was most helpful and arranged for them to travel by government steamer to the village of Owita on New Guinea's south coast. They arrived safely and unloaded the supplies. Then Walter Post returned to Ambon. The day after Christmas, the Ambonese government official took Russell, his 10 native carriers, and supplies in the government launch upstream with a canoe in tow to the first series of rapids. From this point, the supplies and canoe had to be portaged around the rapids. They reached the base camp in late afternoon of the third day. This I learned from a letter forwarded to me through the kindness of the government official. Remembering what I had read of the trail, I commended Russell and the carriers continually to the Lord for strength and safety, courage and endurance. With the other missionaries, I prayed that God would overshadow them, enabling them to reach the Whistle Lakes speedily and safely. How very much he suffered, how imperative our intercession, I was not to know for many weeks to come. While Russell was gone, Margaret Kemp pressed me, encouraging me to attempt more than I in myself thought possible, translating weekly Sunday school lessons for the junior department and supervising several teachers. After only a few months of language study was her idea. I was regularly scheduled to speak in chapel, and the wives of the national workers asked if I would assist them with kindergarten for the children of the teachers and students. It was a valuable experience. I continued furthering my study of the language with a government school teacher from Manado. His excellence in Indonesian inspired me to strive for mastery in the language. Anyone can babble along in pasar or market Malay after a few weeks' study, but proper Indonesian is beautiful without harsh gutturals. To hear the language well spoken is like listening to a symphony played upon the instrument of words, like enjoying a Renoir painted with the brush of fluency, a masterpiece of lights and shadows. At the beginning of the new school year, I was handed a church history book in English and asked if I would accept it as one of the subjects I would be teaching second-year students. I accepted it readily, but after pursuing the first few chapters, I began to think I had more enthusiasm than good sense. How do you present church history to students who, fresh from the jungle, have seen their own coastline, the ocean, and an outside world for the first time within the year? It was quite an assignment, which proved not only a challenge, but an inspiration. Most of those in my first-year classes were Dayaks from Borneo. I don't know what a Dayak is. Dayaks from Borneo. Since all classes were in Indonesian, they had to acquire a working knowledge of a language foreign to them. Many of them had never held a pencil before. Besides their language classes, they were taught reading, writing, arithmetic, music, scripture, memorization, and stories of the Old and New Testaments. Being confined to the classroom was in itself a great trial to them. They had been a free people, living on a periphery of civilization. Never had they been subjected to a schedule. I loved and admired them as they bowed over their books, foreheads creased with frowns with the extreme heat and intense concentration. Trickles of perspiration coursed down their cheeks. I found fulfillment, joy, and tremendous satisfaction in all my responsibilities. This was one of God's priceless gifts to me. To have had to learn to assume responsibilities from the time I was small. I never had time to be bored. I wouldn't have chosen the separation from Russell, but the Lord had promised me when I responded to the missionary calling, "Go, I am with you always." The presence of God and His people kept my heart at peace. In February, word came that Russell would be arriving from Manokwari. My excitement was without bounds. But why Manokwari, a village on the north coast of New Guinea? When the steamer eased into port at Makassar, I was nearly bursting with excitement. Let's see how much time. Positioned at the front of those gathered to greet disembarking passengers, I was totally dismayed when I saw a gaunt, wasted stranger with Walter Post. The other missionaries recognized the slimmed-down Russell as the man they knew before his furlough. But where was the man I had married? The husband who had left for New Guinea in just 18 days on the trail and a few months of meager rations. He had lost more than 60 pounds. Darlene, when I heard his voice, I knew it was Russell, but the voice shouldn't belong to this emaciated stranger. I quickly looked down, not wanting him to see my uneasiness. My shyness amused him, but the shock I felt, thinking of what he must have suffered, was with me for days. He walked with considerable pain, and once back at the house, when he removed his shoes and socks, I knew why. There was no skin on his insteps, the balls of his feet, or any of his toes. He had a serious, advanced case of jungle rot. As Dr. Jaffrey immediately sent for a doctor who came to the house to examine Russell's feet. Turning to me, he said, "Do you see this tissue that is sloughing off? Each morning take a tweezer and tear off every layer until you reach the raw throbbing flesh. Don't apply the ointment that I'm giving you until that rotting flesh is removed. This will be very painful, but there is no way to get to the fungus that has caused Mr. Deibler's condition." Oh my word, is that horrible? Morning after morning, I sat on the end of the bed dressing Russell's feet. The unpleasant task was compounded by the strangeness I experienced in the presence of this wasted, spare man. Russell would laugh when I furtively looked up at him while I tended to his feet. It continued to tickle him, that my garrulous nature had been bested. Dr. Jaffrey, his daughter Margaret, and I spent hours listening to the first-hand account of Russell's trek to the Whistle Lakes. After the first session, I came to wonder not at how much weight he had lost, but that he had survived at all. During the first 3 days of the trip, the carriers forged their way upstream, and Russell claimed that in all his travels up and down Borneo's treacherous rivers, he had never felt as uneasy as he did with these inept oarsmen, who nearly capsized them in midstream. Russell had felt troubled when first introduced to the carriers. Now he knew that he should have trusted his intuition. They, like many of the New Guinea coastals, moved with lethargic, expressionless motions. Russell saw the effects of jungle life on the long-time coastal inhabitants, debilitated by dengue fever and repeated bouts of malaria where no quinine was available. When they arrived at Orawaja, expecting a crude base camp, they found nothing more than a large, mat-walled bamboo structure with a grass roof that barely provided a place out of the rain. His carriers were reduced to 7 by sickness. The 3 who were ill returned to Oita with the canoe. After a hastily prepared meal, Russell and the remaining men divided the supplies among them, then adjusting their packs for the trail, anticipating an early start the following morning. Stretching out on the floor, the carriers were soon asleep. In the stillness that followed, Russell took from his pack his Bible and diary. Lighting a candle, he read, then recorded the events of the past 3 exhausting days. The trail was as hazardous as any of the explorers had described. All day, the lead carriers hacked away at the jungle undergrowth that obscured the crude trail. Each succeeding day carried them farther into the central highlands, with each mountain range higher than the last. They inched along narrow ledges jutting out over huge gorges cut by the Oita River, rushing menacingly below, but serving as their guide to its source, the Whistle Lakes. The jungle-clad mountains begrudgingly gave way to ranges covered with broken bottle limestone outcroppings, often deceptively hidden under moss. The serrated shards cut through the leather soles of Russell's field police boots. Oh my word, cut through the boots! On New Year's Day, Russell awakened feeling completely depleted, physically and concerned. His carriers were few, too few. Would the supplies last? Needing encouragement for the walk ahead into this unknown wilderness, he opened his Bible and came to a portion that seemed illumined on the page. Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be dismayed, for the Lord thy God is with thee, whithersoever thou goest. From Joshua 1:9. In his own inimitable way, with this exhortation, God fortified Russell's soul for the desperate days ahead. Great care was exercised by those in the lead not to dislodge the stones and boulders precariously balanced beside the trail. A boulder set in motion could easily crush others on the switchbacks below. Oh my. Climbing the almost perpendicular walls of the mountains, the men had to test the handholds lest a stone be pried loose and hurtle downward, injuring those beneath. Okay, we're at 30 minutes. Okay, we're going to stop there. Still in chapter 1. It seems as though this is a slower reading than some of our books. It's not a terribly long book, but we might be reading this for a while. We're on page 12. So we will stop here today and pick up again tomorrow. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. Guide me gently through the night and wake me with the morning light. Amen. I hope you sleep well, and I hope you're enjoying the story, and we'll be back tomorrow. Bye.